Millionaire CEO laughed and said, "Prove it." 5 years later, the twins proved everything without saying a word. Hi, my beautiful and loyal family. Welcome back to your own family channel, Mr. Peter Family May. Every woman be surrounded by divine light, wrapped in unshakable courage, and lifted by a peace that never fades, no matter how heavy the storm. May every tear water the seeds of new strength, and every silent night turn into a morning filled with healing and hope. You are the calm in chaos, the strength behind every smile, and the heart that keeps love alive even when the world turns cold. May your steps be guided, your spirit protected, and your soul forever held in God's gentle embrace. My precious family, don't stay silent tonight. Your presence keeps this home warm, alive, and united. A like is a whisper of faith. A comment is a spark of love. A share is a chain of blessing. This is Mission 1000 likes. For every woman who still prays, still loves, still rises despite the weight of the world. If your heart carries love, like this video. If your spirit stands in faith, comment, "I'm with Mr. Peter." The marble lobby of Whitmore Capital stretched like a cathedral of wealth, all polished stone and soaring ceilings that made ordinary people feel small. Maya Rodriguez had never felt smaller than she did walking through those glass doors, 8 months pregnant and desperate for a conversation that should have happened months ago. Security stopped her at the elevator bank. The guard's eyes dropped to her swollen belly, then back to his clipboard where her name didn't exist. "I need to see Julian Whitmore. Tell him Maya Rodriguez is here." "Do you have an appointment?" "Tell him it's about something that can't wait." 20 minutes passed before the guard's radio crackled. His expression shifted when he received his instructions, something between pity and disgust. 40th floor. Someone will escort you." The elevator ride felt eternal. Maya caught her reflection in the polished brass doors, her clearance rack dress, her swollen ankles in shoes that no longer fit properly, her face carrying exhaustion that 8 months of pregnancy and worry had carved into her features. She looked nothing like the woman Julian had pursued 6 months ago, back when she'd been just another forensic accountant at a firm his company had hired for a consultation project. The executive floor was everything the lobby promised, and more. Original artwork lined hallways where assistants moved with purposeful silence. Julian's corner office sat at the end, protected by a receptionist whose designer outfit probably cost more than Maya's entire wardrobe. "Ms. Rodriguez." The woman's tone made the name sound common. "Mr. Whitmore can give you 5 minutes. He has a board meeting." Julian stood when Maya entered, but he didn't come around his desk. He didn't embrace her. He simply gestured to the chair across from him, like she was a vendor pitching services he didn't need. "Maya, this is unexpected." She had rehearsed this moment through sleepless nights, practiced staying calm and rational, but seeing him there, so composed and distant, shattered every careful word she'd prepared. "I'm pregnant, with twins. They're yours." The silence that followed felt thick enough to choke on Julian's expression didn't crack. He simply reached for his desk phone and pressed a button. "Catherine, hold my calls." Then he looked at Maya with eyes that had once made her believe she mattered. Now they held nothing but calculation. "That's quite a claim." "It's not a claim. It's a fact." "Is it?" He walked to the window, hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed in a way that felt deliberately cruel. "Because from where I'm standing, this timing is remarkably convenient. You must have seen the announcement about my engagement." Maya's hands clenched in her lap. "I saw it in the newspaper. That's why I'm here. You deserved to know before everything became public." "How considerate." Julian turned back to face her, and something cold lived in his smile. "Let me guess what happens next. You want money, maybe a quiet settlement, a nice house somewhere far from my actual life. Is that the play?" "The play." Maya stood, her chair scraping against expensive hardwood. "This isn't a game. These are your children." Allegedly my children. He returned to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a leather checkbook. Here's what I'm willing to do. I'll give you $50,000. You sign an NDA, you disappear, and we forget this conversation ever happened. You want me to take money and vanish? I want you to be realistic. Julian began writing the check, his pen moving with casual confidence. Colette and I are getting married in 3 months. Her father is positioned for a gubernatorial run. Our families have been planning this union for years. What you're suggesting would complicate things unnecessarily. Complicate things? Maya's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. I'm telling you that you're going to be a father. And I'm telling you to prove it. Julian ripped the check from the book and held it out. Get a paternity test. Come back with scientific evidence. Until then, you're just another woman who thought sleeping with someone successful entitled her to a piece of his life. The words hit like physical blows. Maya stared at the check, at the zeros that Julian clearly believed would solve his problem. Then she did something that felt more satisfying than anything else in that horrible moment. She took the check, held it between both hands, and tore it slowly in half. Then in half again. The pieces fluttered to his pristine carpet like confetti at a funeral. Keep your money. I don't want anything from you. Then why are you here? Julian's calm finally cracked, irritation bleeding through. What exactly do you expect? I expected you to be a man instead of a coward. Maya moved toward the door, each step requiring more strength than she thought she had left. But you're right about one thing. This was a mistake, not the babies. Coming here. She reached for the door handle, but Julian's voice stopped her. Maya, if those children are actually mine, prove it. Bring me a paternity test after they're born. Until then, don't contact me again. Don't show up at my office. Don't try to disrupt my life with speculation and accusations. She turned back one last time. He stood behind his desk like a king in his castle, surrounded by everything he'd built, everything he valued. None of it was her. None of it would ever be her children. Watch what I build without your name. The words came out steady, despite everything breaking inside her. Watch what they become without you. And when you finally realize what you threw away, remember that you laughed. I'm not laughing. You did. When I first told you, for just a second you smiled like this was funny. Maya opened the door, and 200 employees working in cubicles beyond could probably hear everything now. She didn't care anymore. Those babies are mine. They'll have my name. They'll know exactly what kind of man their father chose to be, and someday they're going to prove everything without me saying a single word. Julian's face hardened. Security will escort you out. I can find my own way. But security came anyway. 2 guards who appeared from nowhere, who flanked her without touching her, who made sure every person in that building watched Maya Rodriguez walk through the lobby, carrying shame she didn't deserve and rage she couldn't release. The parking garage was empty when she finally made it to her car. Maya leaned against the driver's door, her hands shaking so hard she dropped her keys twice, trying to unlock it. The concrete walls echoed with nothing but her ragged breathing and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Then the pain hit. Sharp, sudden, radiating from her lower back around to her stomach, with an intensity that bent her double water gush down her legs, soaking through her dress and pooling on the oil-stained concrete. The babies were coming. Maya fumbled for her phone, started to dial for help, then stopped. Who would she call? Her parents were gone, killed in an accident when she was in college. She had colleagues, not friends. She had no one. She would drive herself. Women had babies every day. She could do this alone, because alone was all Julian Whitmore had left her. Chapter 2. 2 became 3, became everything. County General Hospital smelled like disinfectant and broken promises. Maya had driven herself through contractions that made her vision blur, had parked in the emergency bay with her hazard lights flashing, had stumbled through automatic doors while a security guard shouted about moving her vehicle. None of that mattered once the nurses took over. How far apart are the contractions? 3 minutes, maybe less. Who's with you? Where's your partner? Maya's laugh came out bitter. There is no partner. The nurse's expression softened with understanding. That made everything worse. Pity was harder to bear than Julian's contempt. At least his cruelty had been honest. They wheeled her to labor and delivery, where the walls were painted a soothing blue that did nothing to soothe. The pain came in waves that obliterated thought, that reduced her entire existence to breathing and pushing and enduring. Hours blurred together. Night became morning, became afternoon. The doctor talked about complications with Twin B, about possible emergency interventions, about risks Maya couldn't process through the agony. You're doing great, Maya, just a little longer. But great felt like a lie. Great was having someone hold your hand. Great was a partner coaching you through the worst pain imaginable. Great was not laboring alone in a hospital room while the father of your children sat in his penthouse planning a wedding to someone else. I can see the first baby's head. One more push. Maya bore down with everything she had left. The scream that tore from her throat didn't sound human. Then suddenly, impossibly, there was crying, high-pitched and furious and alive. It's a girl! They placed the baby on Maya's chest for 3 seconds before whisking her away to check vitals. Maya barely had time to register the tiny face, the shock of dark hair, the fingers curled into fists before the next contraction hit, and the whole nightmare started again. Twin B is breech. We need to turn her. The doctor's hands pressed into Maya's belly, manipulating, rotating. The pain transcended anything that had come before. Maya screamed until her voice gave out, until there was nothing left but animal sounds and tears streaming down her face. Got her. Here comes baby number 2. This birth was faster, but somehow worse. Maya had no strength remaining. She pushed on pure survival instinct, while nurses shouted encouragement that sounded like noise. Then another cry joined the first, and suddenly there were 2 babies in the world who hadn't existed that morning. 2 healthy girls. Congratulations, Mama. They cleaned the babies and returned them to Maya's arms. She stared at their faces, trying to memorize every detail through exhaustion that made her bones feel liquid. They were identical, perfect mirrors of each other. One had come first, leading the way. The other had been stubborn, refusing to cooperate until forced. Even now, they were already themselves. Have you chosen names? Maya hadn't let herself think about names. Naming them made everything real in a way she hadn't been ready to face. But looking at her daughters now, the names arrived fully formed. Lucia, she touched the first baby's cheek, and Natalia. Beautiful names. Do you want us to contact the father? No, father. Just us. The nurse squeezed Maya's shoulder with a kindness that threatened to break what little composure remained. You did an amazing thing today. Don't forget that. But amazing felt hollow when the hospital released them 2 days later, and Maya carried both babies to her car alone. The infant seats had taken her an hour to install properly, following instructions while 8 months pregnant and terrified of making mistakes. Now she buckled her daughters in with trembling hands, double-checking every strap, while other families loaded up nearby with fathers carrying diaper bags and grandmothers offering advice. The drive home took 20 minutes. Maya's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building where the elevator rarely worked. She made 3 trips up the stairs, carrying one baby, then the other, then the hospital bag stuffed with supplies and pamphlets about postpartum care. By the time she locked the door behind her, her surgical incision was screaming and blood had soaked through her pad. The apartment had never felt smaller. Maya's bedroom barely held her full bed. There was no nursery, no carefully decorated space with matching furniture and stuffed animals. She'd bought 2 baskets from a thrift store and lined them with clean towels. That's where Lucia and Natalia would sleep until Maya could afford something better. If she could afford something better. The first night, neither baby slept longer than 40 minutes. Maya fed them, changed them, walked circles around her tiny living room while they screamed in shifts. When dawn finally broke through her blinds, she hadn't slept at all. Her body felt destroyed, her mind felt worse, but her daughters needed her. So she kept going. Weeks dissolved into a fog of feedings every 2 hours, diapers that never seemed to end, and a loneliness so profound it became physical. Maya tried to work from home, balancing her laptop on her knees while babies nursed. She took client calls with one daughter strapped to her chest in a second-hand carrier, while the other slept in a basket at her feet. She learned to type one-handed, to eat standing up, to survive on 3 hours of sleep stitched together from 20-minute intervals. The women from her former workplace sent a fruit basket her landlord asked about the noise. Nobody offered real help. Maya stopped showering regularly, stopped changing out of nursing tanks and stained sweatpants, stopped recognizing herself in the mirror. She'd once been a woman who wore pressed suits and presented findings to executives. Now she was someone who couldn't remember the last time she'd brushed her hair. But Lucia and Natalia thrived. They grew fat on her milk. They started sleeping longer stretches. They began making sounds that weren't just crying, little coos and grunts that felt like the first words of a language only the 3 of them would ever speak. On their first birthday, Maya bought a grocery store cake and sang alone in her apartment while her daughters smashed frosting into their high-chair trays. She took a photo on her phone, the only record of the milestone. No family gathered around, no proud father filming every moment, just them. That same week, Maya's phone rang with an opportunity that shouldn't have been possible. A divorce attorney she'd worked with once had a client whose husband was hiding assets. The case was complicated, the money trail deliberately obscured. The attorney needed someone brilliant. "I'll pay double your usual rate, but I need answers fast." Maya negotiated childcare with her downstairs neighbor, an elderly woman who seemed lonely enough to welcome the company. She set up her daughters with toys and snacks, kissed their foreheads, and went to work with a focus she'd almost forgotten she possessed. 3 weeks later, she'd traced 50 accounts across 4 states and uncovered $3 million her client's husband had tried to hide. The wife got half in the divorce settlement. The attorney spread Maya's name to every colleague who would listen. Her phone started ringing. 1 case became 5. 5 became 12. Maya hired her first employee, then a second. She rented office space in a building where the elevator actually worked. She brought Lucia and Natalia with her every day, setting up a playpen in the corner where they learned their alphabet from financial documents taped to the walls and their numbers from spreadsheets their mother studied until midnight. Other mothers had playdates and preschool programs. Maya's daughters had balance sheets and corporate structures. They fell asleep to the sound of keyboard clicks and client calls. They learned early that work wasn't something you did when convenient. It was what kept the lights on, and food in the refrigerator, and their mother's promise alive. The promise Maya made to herself every time she looked at their faces. Julian Whitmore's rejection would be the best thing that ever happened to them. They would never need his name. They would build their own worth from nothing, the way she was building it now. And someday, when he finally realized what he'd thrown away, it would be too late to matter, because by then they would be everything he'd never imagined possible. Chapter 3. The Architect and Her Blueprints. Lucia's question came out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary moment that splits your life into before and after without warning. "Mama, why do Aisha and Zoe have dads who pick them up, but we don't?" Maya's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She'd known this conversation would come eventually. She'd rehearsed answers during sleepless nights, practiced staying calm and truthful without revealing the ugliness underneath. but no rehearsal prepared her for the innocent confusion in her daughter's voice. They were 4, still small enough to believe their mother could fix anything. "Your father made a choice before you were born." Maya kept her eyes on the road, navigating afternoon traffic while her heart hammered against her ribs. "He decided he wasn't ready to be a dad. That was his decision, not anything wrong with you." "But doesn't he want to meet us?" Natalia's voice came from the back seat, always ready to ask what Lucia was thinking, but didn't say. "Maybe someday he will, maybe he won't. But it doesn't matter because we have each other. We're complete exactly as we are." "Are you sad about it?" Lucia again, too perceptive for someone barely out of toddlerhood. Maya pulled into their apartment complex parking lot and turned to face both daughters. They stared back with Julian's eyes set in her face, a genetic compromise that made strangers ask if they had Mediterranean heritage. Nobody ever guessed their father was a white executive who'd laughed when she told him they existed. "I'm not sad, I'm grateful. Because if he'd stayed, I wouldn't have learned how strong we could be. You two made me better than I was before." The girls seemed to accept this. They unbuckled themselves and raced upstairs, already distracted by plans for the afternoon. But Maya sat in the car for 5 more minutes, gripping the wheel and breathing through the old wound that never quite healed. She'd built so much since that day in Julian's office. Her firm employed 15 people now. She'd testified in court cases that made headlines. She'd bought a small house in a neighborhood with good public schools and trees lining the sidewalks. She'd given her daughters stability and security and proof that one parent could be enough. But some nights, when Lucia asked questions that deserved better answers and Natalia watched her with eyes that missed nothing, Maya still felt the echo of Julian's laughter in her chest. Inside, the girls were already building elaborate structures with wooden blocks. Maya watched them work together with a synchronicity that needed no words. Lucia placed each piece with mathematical precision. Natalia added creative flourishes that made no structural sense, but transformed the buildings into art. "We're making a castle for queens," Natalia announced, "because princesses are boring and queens make the rules." Smart thinking. Maya settled on the floor beside them. "What kind of rules would your queens make?" "Everyone has to share," Lucia said immediately, "and no lying ever. And people who break promises have to leave the kingdom forever." Natalia placed a turret with more force than necessary, and Maya wondered what her daughters understood that they never spoke aloud. The years accumulated like interest in a savings account. Kindergarten became first grade, became second. Maya's firm expanded to 3 offices across 2 states. She became the forensic accountant that high-powered divorce attorneys called when wives needed ammunition against husbands who thought hiding money made them clever. She had a gift for finding what men tried to bury, maybe because she understood exactly how much they were capable of concealing. Her reputation spread through whispers in courtrooms and conference rooms. The woman who never missed a decimal point, the investigator who could trace money through shell companies and offshore accounts like following breadcrumbs, the expert whose testimony could shift million-dollar settlements. Maya charged premium rates and earned every cent. She bought a better house in a better neighborhood. She hired a housekeeper and a yard service and paid for after-school programs where Lucia and Natalia learned music and art and sports. She gave them stability wrapped in routines that never broke, but she never gave them softness about their father. When Lucia asked why they had Mama's last name instead of a dad's name, Maya explained that some children carry their father's name out of tradition, but they carried hers because she was the one who showed up. When Natalia wondered if their dad ever thought about them, Maya said maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. But thinking wasn't the same as doing, and only actions mattered. The girls absorbed these lessons and stopped asking questions. They watched their mother work 70-hour weeks without complaining. They saw her take client calls at midnight and wake at dawn to review documents. They learned that excellence wasn't optional, that competence was the only currency that held value, that promises meant nothing without proof. Other children had parents who coached their teams and chaperoned field trips. Lucia and Natalia had a mother who taught them to read corporate financial statements by age 7 and understand offshore tax structures by age 9. They spent summers in her office, filing documents and learning database management while their classmates went to sleepaway camp. "Why do we have to work when it's summer?" Natalia complained once, hot and bored and tired of spreadsheets. "Because you need to understand that nothing in this life is free." Maya didn't look up from the contract she was reviewing. "Not security, not success, not respect. You earn it or you lose it. There's no in between." "That's harsh, Mama." "The world is harsh, baby. I'm just making sure you're ready." By the time they started middle school, Lucia and Natalia Rodriguez were different from other children in ways that couldn't be measured on report cards. They'd never had a childhood that revolved around their wants. They'd grown up understanding that survival required strategy, that trust required evidence, that people who made promises often broke them when circumstances changed. They'd learned to count on themselves and each other. Everyone else was provisional. Maya told herself this was strength, that she was raising warriors, not victims, that her daughters would never be blindsided by a man's rejection because they'd never learned to need male validation in the first place. But late at night, when the house was quiet and her daughters slept in rooms decorated with academic achievement awards and certificates from competitions they'd dominated, Maya sometimes wondered if she'd protected them or just transferred her wounds onto different skin. Then she'd remember Julian's face when he laughed. Remember the check he'd written like she was a problem to solve. Remember walking out of that building with nothing but rage and determination, and she'd know she'd done the right thing. Her daughters would never need a man to define their worth. They'd never beg for scraps of attention from someone who'd already decided they weren't worth his time. They'd never cry over someone who'd chosen convenience over character. They would be better than that. They would be better than her. The Senate subpoena arrived on a Thursday in March, delivered by a courier who made Maya sign 3 separate documents confirming receipt. She read it twice, certain she'd misunderstood the details. Congressional Committee hearing on corporate fraud and tax evasion. Multiple companies under investigation. Her testimony required regarding forensic analysis she'd conducted on real estate transactions spanning 5 years. One of the companies listed was Whitmore Capital. Maya's hands didn't shake when she called her attorney. Her voice remained steady when she explained the situation. But after she hung up, she sat at her desk for 20 minutes, staring at Julian's name on official letterhead and feeling absolutely nothing. 10 years had passed since she'd walked out of his office, 10 years since she'd torn his check in half. 10 years since she'd promised to build something he couldn't destroy. Now she'd be testifying before Congress about his company's financial crimes. The universe had a savage sense of humor. "Mama, what's wrong?" Lucia appeared in the doorway, home from school and too observant for Maya's comfort. "Nothing's wrong. I have to testify at a hearing in Washington." "About what?" "Corporate fraud. Money hidden where it shouldn't be. The usual." Natalia joined her sister, both of them studying Maya with identical expressions of concern. "You look weird, like something bad happened." Maya folded the subpoena and slid it into her desk drawer. "Nothing bad, just surprising. One of the companies I'm testifying about is Whitmore Capital." The silence that followed was deafening. Both girls knew the name, they'd always known it. Maya had never hidden their father's identity, just refused to make him important. He was information, not a person, a name on their birth certificates that meant nothing beyond genetics. "That's his company." Lucia's statement carried no emotion, just fact. "Yes." "Will you see him?" "Probably, but that doesn't change anything. He's not relevant to the testimony. He's just another executive whose company broke the law." Natalia crossed her arms, her jaw set in an expression Maya recognized from her own mirror. Good. I hope your testimony destroys him. Natalia. What? He deserves it. He threw you away. He threw us away. Now he gets to watch you be more important than him. Maya should have corrected her daughter's vindictiveness, should have preached about professionalism and separating personal feelings from professional obligations. But looking at Natalia's fierce expression and Lucia's quiet fury, she couldn't find the words to pretend she disagreed. My testimony will be factual and thorough. Whatever happens after that is consequence, not revenge. Consequence is just revenge with better manners, Lucia said quietly, and Maya couldn't argue with that either. Chapter 4. The Girls Who Learned to Count. The middle school cafeteria smelled like industrial pizza and teenage chaos. Lucia Rodriguez sat at a corner table with her biology textbook open, ignoring the noise while she studied cellular mitosis for a test she'd probably ace without effort. 2 tables over, Natalia held court with a group of girls telling some elaborate story that involved dramatic hand gestures and laughter. They were identical twins who couldn't have been more different. Lucia lived inside her head, processing the world through logic and patterns. She spoke rarely but precisely. She had 2 friends, both as quiet as her, both perfectly content to spend lunch reading instead of socializing. She tested into advanced classes without trying and found comfort in problems that had concrete solutions. Natalia burned bright and loud. She questioned everything, challenged teachers who gave weak explanations, and turned every school project into performance art. She had dozens of friends and genuinely liked most of them. She tested into advanced classes because she argued her way past the initial rejection when her grades didn't quite meet the threshold. Different girls, same relentless drive. Your mom is so intense, Hannah whispered to Lucia during study hall. My mom saw her testify at my aunt's divorce trial. She said your mom destroyed my uncle in like 20 minutes. Lucia looked up from her chemistry homework. Your uncle was hiding money. Mama just found it. But she made him look like a criminal. He was a criminal. He lied under oath. Hannah shifted uncomfortably. I guess. It's just weird that your mom does that for a job. Most moms are teachers or nurses or whatever. Most moms didn't raise twins alone after the dad walked away. Lucia returned to her homework, the conversation clearly over. Hannah didn't bring it up again. Across campus in the art room, Natalia was painting a portrait for the school exhibition that had her teacher both impressed and concerned. The woman in the painting stood alone in an office, surrounded by papers and screens, her face showing exhaustion wrapped in determination. Is this your mother? Mrs. Chen studied the canvas with careful attention. Yeah, she works all the time. Do you resent that? Natalia considered the question while adding shadows to the woman's eyes. No. She works because she has to. Because nobody else was going to take care of us. I respect that. Most children your age want more time with their parents. Most children our age have 2 parents. We have one who does the work of 3. You adjust. Mrs. Chen looked like she wanted to say something about therapy or emotional processing, but Natalia's expression made it clear the conversation was finished. Some teachers learned quickly that the Rodriguez twins weren't interested in pity. At home that evening, Maya reviewed documents for the congressional hearing while her daughters did homework at the kitchen table. The house had settled into comfortable silence, everyone focused on their separate tasks but existing in the same space. This was their routine proximity without invasion. Mama, do you ever think about dating? Natalia asked suddenly, her pencil pausing over her math problems. Maya's fingers stopped moving across her keyboard. Where did that come from? Aisha's mum got remarried last month. The wedding was really nice. She seems happy. I'm happy. You're focused. That's not the same thing. Natalia. Lucia's voice carried a warning. They had an unspoken agreement about pushing their mother on certain topics, but Natalia ignored her sister. I'm just saying, you're allowed to have a life that isn't just work and us. You two are my life. My work supports that life. I don't need anything else. Don't you get lonely? Maya closed her laptop and turned to face both daughters. They'd grown tall enough that people often asked if they were older than they claimed. Lucia had inherited Julian's height. Natalia had inherited his confidence. Both had inherited his intensity, though they'd weaponized it in ways he'd never imagined. I get tired. I get frustrated. I get excited when I solve a complicated case, but lonely? No. You can only be lonely when you're missing something. I have everything I need. What about what you want? Natalia pressed. I want you two to finish your homework. I want to nail this testimony next month. I want our lives to keep improving at the rate they have been. Those are my wants. Lucia spoke without looking up from her physics textbook. She's asking if you ever want a partner, someone who isn't us. The silence stretched until it felt uncomfortable. No, Maya finally said. I learned what happens when you trust someone with that kind of power. Your father taught me that lesson thoroughly. I don't need to repeat it. We're not him. Natalia's jaw set in that stubborn expression that signaled an argument coming. I know that, but the principle remains. Depending on someone else means giving them the ability to disappoint you. I prefer self-sufficiency. That's a sad way to live. It's a safe way to live. And after everything I've seen in my work, after every wife whose husband cleaned out accounts and left her with nothing, I'll take safe over romantic any day. Natalia looked like she wanted to argue further, but Lucia caught her eye and shook her head slightly. They had their own silent language, a twin communication that needed no words. The conversation ended, but Maya noticed that neither girl seemed satisfied with her answer. The school year continued with its predictable rhythm. Lucia won the regional competition for advanced mathematics. Natalia's painting got selected for the state exhibition, and people actually drove hours to see it in person. Both girls maintained perfect grades while participating in activities that looked good for future applications to competitive high schools. They were building resumes before most kids knew resumes existed. Maya attended their events when possible, though work often intervened. She missed Lucia's award ceremony because a client emergency required immediate attention. She arrived late to Natalia's art show opening because a deposition ran long. Her daughters accepted these absences without complaint. They understood that money didn't appear through wishes, that success required sacrifice, that their mother's presence at every school event was less important than her ability to pay for the house they lived in and the opportunities they'd been given. Other parents might have called this neglect. Maya called it reality. Do you think Mama wishes she had easier kids? Lucia asked one night after Maya had fallen asleep on the couch, surrounded by case files. Natalia looked up from her sketchbook. What do you mean? Kids who didn't need so much, who weren't twins, who didn't remind her of him every time she looks at us, who didn't require her to be perfect all the time just to keep everything together. She loves us. I know she loves us. That's not what I asked. Natalia closed her sketchbook, giving her sister full attention. You think about this stuff too much. Mama's mama. She does what she has to do. We do what we have to do. That's the deal. But what if she's miserable and just hiding it? Then that's her choice. We can't fix whatever broke in her before we existed. All we can do is be worth the sacrifice. Lucia absorbed this, then nodded slowly. Okay. We be worth it. Always. They woke their mother eventually, guided her to her bedroom, and took over organizing her case files by the system she'd taught them years ago. Then they finished their own homework, turned off the lights, and went to their separate rooms where they lay awake thinking about questions that had no good answers, like whether their mother had killed some essential part of herself to raise them alone. like whether they were the reason she never smiled the way other mothers smiled, like whether their very existence was the price she paid for their father's cruelty. They never asked these questions aloud. Some truths were too heavy to speak. Instead, they threw themselves into achievement with a ferocity that made teachers worry about burnout. Lucia started taking advanced placement classes a year early. Natalia volunteered for every leadership position available and won most of them. They competed in academic competitions and debate tournaments and science fairs. They collected victories like proof that they'd been worth keeping. At the end of the year, the school counselor called Maya in for a meeting that felt more like an intervention. Ms. Williams had kind eyes and a gentle voice that made Maya instantly defensive. "Your daughters are exceptional students. You should be very proud." "I am. But I'm concerned about the pressure they seem to be under. They're 12, and they're operating like they're applying to universities already. They're preparing for their future. That's good planning. It's also exhausting. Children need time to just be children." Maya leaned forward, her patience already wearing thin. "Ms. Williams, I appreciate your concern, but my daughters understand that success requires effort. They're not under pressure from me. They're motivated on their own." "Are they? Or have they internalized your expectations so thoroughly that they've made them their own?" "Is there a difference?" "Yes. There's a significant difference." The counselor pulled out a folder with the school's logo. "Both girls show signs of anxiety. Lucia has perfect attendance because she's afraid of falling behind. Natalia overcommits to activities because she thinks achievement equals worth. These are patterns that concern me. These are patterns that will serve them well in competitive environments." "They're 12, Ms. Williams repeated. "They should be worried about friendships and hobbies, not building resumes." Maya stood, the meeting clearly over in her mind. "My daughters are prepared for the world as it actually exists, not as we wish it existed. If that makes them different from other children, I'm comfortable with that difference." "Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for your time." Maya left the office and immediately called both girls out of class. They drove home in silence until Natalia finally asked what happened. "The counselor thinks you're too focused on achievement, that you need more balance." "We're fine," Lucia said quietly. "I know you are, but I need you to hear something." Maya pulled into their driveway and turned to face them. "Everything I've pushed you toward, everything I've taught you about work and excellence and self-sufficiency, that's all true. The world will demand those things from you. But if it's too much, if you need something different, you can tell me." "It's not too much," Natalia said immediately. "We like being good at stuff," Lucia added. "It feels better than being mediocre." "Okay, but the offer stands. Always." The girls nodded and went inside, leaving Maya sitting in the car, wondering if the counselor was right, if she'd transferred her trauma onto her daughters and called it preparation, if they were achieving out of genuine passion or desperate need to prove their worth. But when she walked inside, she found them already back at the kitchen table doing homework without being asked. They looked content, focused whole. Maybe Ms. Williams was wrong, or maybe the damage was already too deep to recognize. Chapter 5. The Empire Built on Receipts. The conference room held 12 attorneys, 6 accountants, and enough tension to choke on. Maya Rodriguez stood at the head of the table with a presentation that would either secure the biggest case of her career or send her firm into bankruptcy, trying. The Henderson divorce involves assets exceeding $400 million. Mr. Henderson claims he's worth roughly half that. He's lying. She clicked through slides showing corporate structures so complex they looked like spider webs, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies in Delaware and Nevada, real estate holdings buried under layers of trusts and LLCs. I can find every dollar he's hidden. But this investigation will require resources, staff, time. And there's no guarantee Mrs. Henderson can pay if we don't recover enough to justify the expense. Margaret Chen, the lead divorce attorney, leaned forward. What's your confidence level? 90%. Maybe higher. Men like Henderson follow patterns. I've seen this structure before. I know where to look. And if you're wrong, then I eat the cost and you find another forensic accountant. But I'm not wrong. Maya had built her entire reputation on not being wrong. Rodriguez and Associates now employed 26 people across 4 offices. She'd personally handled investigations that recovered over $2 billion for clients whose husbands thought hiding money made them clever. She'd testified in court cases that made headlines. She'd become the expert that other experts called when cases seemed impossible. She was 34 years old and controlled an empire built on finding what powerful men tried to bury. Margaret exchanged glances with her colleagues, then nodded. You have the case. Full support. Whatever resources you need. They shook hands, and Maya left the conference room already mentally assembling her team. This investigation would consume the next 6 months. Outside, the San Francisco fog rolled through streets lined with buildings that touched the sky. Maya's office occupied the 14th floor of a tower where rent cost more per month than she'd made in an entire year when Lucia and Natalia were born. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lucia. Natalia got elected student body president. She's insufferable. Maya smiled and texted back, let her celebrate, you'll win something next week, and lord it over her. Already planning to. Her daughters were 10 now, growing faster than seemed possible. They'd become the kind of children who made other parents simultaneously envious and exhausted. Too smart for their own good. Too driven to ever be satisfied. Too aware of their mother's sacrifices to waste opportunities on foolishness. Maya had raised them in her offices the way some women raised children in churches. They'd learned to read financial statements before they'd learned to ride bikes. They'd absorbed lessons about money and power and survival, while other kids watched cartoons and played video games. Summer break started next week. While their classmates prepared for camps and vacations, Lucia and Natalia would spend 3 months working at Rodriguez and Associates, learning database management and document organization. You're making them grow up too fast, Maya's friend Rachel had said once, the only person brave enough to voice the concern. I'm making them ready, Maya had corrected. The world doesn't wait for you to be prepared. Rachel hadn't argued further, because looking at Maya's success, at her daughter's excellence, at the life she'd built from ruins, it was hard to say she'd done anything wrong. The Henderson case consumed Maya like she'd predicted. She worked 16-hour days tracking money through accounts that existed only on paper. She found properties purchased under fake names and companies that existed solely to hold titles to other companies. She built a web of financial fraud so elaborate it took 3 poster boards to map completely. 6 months later, she'd recovered $320 million that Mrs. Henderson would have lost without her. The divorce attorney's firm paid Maya's percentage gladly. The money hit her account like a seismic event. More in one payment than she'd made in entire years of her earlier career. She bought a bigger house in a neighborhood where tech executives raised their families, 4 bedrooms, a yard, good schools within walking distance. She hired a housekeeper who came 3 times a week. She upgraded her car from practical to comfortable. She opened investment accounts for her daughters that would pay for college without loans or struggle. But she didn't change anything essential. She still worked 70-hour weeks. She still pushed herself and her staff toward perfection. She still operated like she was one mistake away from losing everything. Lucia and Natalia adjusted to their new house with characteristic efficiency. They claimed their rooms, organized their belongings, and established new routines without complaint. Sometimes Maya wondered if she'd made them too independent, too self-sufficient, too accustomed to managing without her. Then she'd remember Julian Whitmore laughing in his office, and she'd know she'd done exactly what needed doing. The Senate subpoena arrived 2 weeks after they'd settled into the new house. Maya read it 3 times, certain she'd misunderstood the scope: a congressional hearing on corporate fraud and tax evasion, multiple companies under investigation, her expertise required. One of those companies was Whitmore Capital. She sat at her new desk in her new home office, staring at Julian's name on official government letterhead, and felt absolutely nothing. 10 years had passed since that day in his office. 10 years since he demanded she prove her daughters were his. 10 years since she'd promised to build something without his name. Now she'd be testifying before Congress about crimes his company had committed. The universe had impeccable timing. "Mama?" Natalia stood in the doorway, backpack still on from school. "You okay? You look weird." "I'm fine, just got assigned to an interesting case." "What kind of interesting?" Maya hesitated, then decided her daughters deserved honesty. "I have to testify before a congressional committee about corporate fraud. One of the companies involved is Whitmore Capital." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Both girls knew their father's name, they'd always known. Maya had never hidden his identity, just refused to make him important. His company broke the law. Lucia appeared beside her sister, both of them staring at Maya with identical expressions of interest. "That's what the evidence suggests. My job is to present the forensic analysis, not determine guilt." "But you think he's guilty?" Natalia's statement needed no question mark. "I think his company engaged in practices that violated federal regulations. Whether he knew about them personally is different matter." "Will you see him?" "Probably. The hearing is public. He'll likely attend." Lucia and Natalia exchanged one of their silent twin conversations, entire paragraphs communicated through glances. Then Lucia spoke carefully. "Are you scared?" "Of what?" "Seeing him. After everything." Maya considered lying, then rejected the impulse. "I'm not scared, I'm curious. I want to see if he's changed. If success made him better or just gave him better excuses." "I hope he's miserable," Natalia said flatly. "I hope losing you and us has haunted him every single day." "Natalia, what?" "He deserves it. You gave him a chance. He laughed at you. Now he gets to watch you be more successful than him while testifying about his crimes. That's justice." Maya should have corrected her daughter's vindictiveness, should have preached about professionalism and separating personal history from professional obligations. But looking at Natalia's fierce expression and Lucia's quiet support, she couldn't find the words to pretend she felt differently. 10 years ago, she'd walked out of Julian Whitmore's office carrying nothing but rage and 2 babies who deserved better. Now she controlled a firm worth millions. She owned a beautiful home. She'd raised daughters who were extraordinary, and she'd be standing in front of Congress explaining exactly how his company had broken the law. If that felt like revenge disguised as responsibility, Maya was comfortable with the ambiguity. "My testimony will be factual and thorough," she told her daughters. "Whatever happens after that is consequence, not revenge." "Consequence is just revenge with better paperwork," Lucia said quietly, and Maya couldn't disagree. Chapter 6. The Algorithm That Remembers Everything. The Whitmore Capital file arrived in a secure courier box that required 3 signatures. Maya carried it to her office and closed the door before opening it, like the contents might explode if handled carelessly. $47 million in suspicious transactions, shell companies with addresses that traced to empty storefronts. Real estate purchases made through entities that existed only on paper. Investor reports that showed steady growth, while internal documents revealed significant losses, the kind of fraud that happened when executives believed they were too important to face consequences. Maya had seen this pattern dozens of times. Wealthy men who built empires on lies convinced themselves the lies were strategy. They called it aggressive accounting or creative financing, never acknowledging they were just thieves in expensive suits. Her hands didn't shake as she reviewed the documents. Her heart rate stayed steady. Julian Whitmore, was just another name in another case file, another rich man who'd thought rules were for people who couldn't afford to break them. She'd spent 10 years building immunity to his existence. This would be no different. Except it was different, because Lucia found the documents on the dining table 3 nights later while Maya was working late. Her daughter stood in the kitchen doorway holding a page with Whitmore Capital's logo, her expression unreadable. "You left this out." Maya looked up from her laptop. "I did, I'm sorry. That should be in my office." "Whitmore Capital, that's his company." Lucia's voice carried no emotion, just observation. "Yes. These are his crimes. These are crimes committed by people within his company. Whether he personally directed them or simply allowed them to happen is what the investigation will determine." Natalia appeared behind her sister, drawn by the conversation like a moth to flame. She took the document from Lucia's hand and scanned it quickly, her mouth tightening as she read, $47 million. That's what he was hiding while you were pregnant with us, feeding us, raising us alone. "We don't know the timeline yet. Does it matter?" Natalia's voice rose. "He had money to hide while you were working yourself half to death just to keep us fed. He had millions to bury in shell companies while you couldn't afford decent health insurance." Maya closed her laptop and faced both daughters. They'd grown tall this year, shooting up like weeds, all legs and angles and fury inherited from both their parents. At 11, they already understood injustice with a clarity that most adults spent lifetimes avoiding. "You're right, the contrast is ugly, but my testimony isn't about revenge. It's about evidence and patterns and professional analysis." "But you're glad." Lucia's statement needed no question. "You're glad that you get to be the one who exposes what he did." Maya considered lying, then rejected the impulse. "Yes, I'm glad. Not because I want to hurt him, but because I want him to see what I became after he discarded us. I want him to sit in that hearing room and realize that the woman he laughed at now has the power to destroy what he built." "That sounds like revenge to me," Natalia said. "Then maybe I'm okay with that." The girls absorbed this admission, seeming satisfied with the honesty. They'd always preferred harsh truth to comfortable lies. Maya had raised them that way deliberately, teaching them to trust reality over reassurance. "Can we see him?" Lucia asked. "After the hearing, can we meet him?" The question hit like a punch. Maya had spent a decade ensuring her daughters never asked for their father. She'd made their family unit so complete, so sufficient, that they'd never seemed to feel the absence. Now, faced with the reality that he existed somewhere beyond her control, they wanted to see the face that matched half their genetics. "Why would you want that?" "Curiosity." Lucia shrugged. "We know everything about him from your stories, but we don't actually know him. Maybe we should. Maybe it's time." "He didn't want to know you when it mattered. We're aware, but we're not asking if he deserves to meet us. We're asking if we deserve to see him for ourselves. That's different." Maya had no good answer for that logic. Her daughters were right. They deserved to make their own assessments, form their own conclusions, decide for themselves whether their father was worth knowing, even if it terrified her to give them that choice. After the hearing. "If you still want to after watching me testify about his company's crimes, we'll discuss it." Both girls nodded, accepting the conditional agreement. They returned the documents and went back to their homework, leaving Maya alone with the uncomfortable realization that she'd built walls around her daughters that might need dismantling. The congressional hearing took place in Washington on a Tuesday in October. Maya flew in the night before, reviewed her testimony until dawn, and arrived at the Capitol building wearing a suit that cost more than the entire outfit she'd worn to confront Julian 11 years ago. The hearing room was exactly what she'd expected. Wooden panels, high ceilings, senators arranged on an elevated platform like judges at a trial, cameras captured everything. Journalists filled the back rows. This wasn't about justice. It was theater pretending to be accountability. Maya took her seat at the witness table and scanned the audience. Julian sat 3 rows back with his legal team. He'd aged well, the way wealthy men typically did. Silver at his temples now. Lines around his eyes that might have been wisdom or might have been stress. He wore a suit that probably cost $5,000 and an expression that revealed nothing. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. Maya didn't blink, didn't acknowledge him, didn't give him the satisfaction of reaction. Then she turned her attention to the committee and proceeded to destroy his company's financial credibility in 40 minutes of testimony that left no room for interpretation. She walked them through every hidden account, every shell company, every fraudulent report filed with investors. She presented evidence so clear that even senators who barely understood basic accounting could follow the trail of deception. Ms. Rodriguez, in your professional opinion, could these activities have occurred without executive knowledge? No, Senator. The scope and sophistication of these schemes required coordination at the highest levels. This wasn't rogue employees. This was systematic fraud approved by leadership. And Whitmore Capital's CEO would have been aware. The CEO would have had to approve multiple aspects of these transactions, whether he understood they were illegal or simply chose not to examine them too closely is a question for prosecutors, not forensic accountants. She never said Julian's name, never looked at him again. But everyone in that room understood exactly who she was discussing. When the hearing ended, Maya gathered her materials and left through the side entrance before anyone could approach her. She had a flight home in 4 hours. She had daughters who needed dinner and help with homework. She had a life that didn't include standing around answering questions about a man who'd made his choices a decade ago. But Julian found her anyway. Maya, wait. She turned in the corridor outside the hearing room. He stood 10 feet away, his legal team hovering behind him like protective shadows. That's quite a performance you gave in there. That was testimony, not performance. You could have presented the same information without making it so personal. Maya stepped closer, closing the distance until they stood near enough to speak quietly. I presented facts. If they felt personal, maybe that's because you built a company on lies while I was building a life on truth. That's not my problem. I saw the girls in the photograph from their school. Julian's composure cracked slightly. They look like my mother. They look like themselves. Your mother is irrelevant to them. Are they happy? The question seemed to genuinely matter to him, which somehow made everything worse. They're brilliant. They're strong. They're kind when it counts and ruthless when it doesn't. They're everything I raised them to be without your help. So yes, they're happy. Your absence made that possible. Julian flinched. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Mistakes are accidental. You looked at me carrying your children and chose to laugh. You chose to demand proof. You chose to offer money instead of responsibility. Those weren't mistakes. That was character. People change. Do they? Or do they just regret consequences once they finally arrive? Maya picked up her briefcase. I have a flight to catch. I'm sure your attorneys have plenty to discuss with you about today's testimony. Can I meet them, the girls? I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Maya studied him for a long moment. He looked sincere. He looked sorry. He looked like a man who'd finally realized what he'd thrown away. None of that mattered. No. They asked if they could meet you. I told them I'd consider it. After seeing you here today, after watching you sit in that hearing room without the courage to even acknowledge what your company did, my answer is no. You don't get access to them. You don't get to soothe your guilt by playing father 11 years too late. Maya, you had your chance. You laughed. Now they're mine, and I protect what's mine. She turned to leave, then paused. Your company is finished. The evidence I provided today will trigger federal investigations. You'll probably lose everything, and somehow that feels appropriate." She walked away without looking back, her heels clicking against marble floors that echoed in the vast space Julian didn't follow. His lawyers probably wouldn't let him. Maya left Washington that afternoon feeling lighter than she had in years. She'd faced Julian Whitmore and felt absolutely nothing. No lingering attraction, no residual hurt, no desire for his approval or explanation. He'd become irrelevant, and that was better than revenge. When she arrived home, Lucia and Natalia were waiting in the kitchen with questions about the hearing. Maya told them everything, including Julian's request to meet them. "And you said no?" Natalia asked. "I said no." "Good." Lucia returned to her homework. "We changed our minds anyway. If he wanted to meet us, he had 11 years to try. We're not interested anymore." Maya had expected disappointment or at least curiosity. Instead, her daughters seemed satisfied with her decision. They'd tested the boundary, found it solid, and accepted it. Maybe they'd never really wanted to meet him. Maybe they just wanted to know that someone would protect them from making choices they weren't ready for. Either way, the conversation ended. Julian Whitmore remained a name on their birth certificates and nothing more. Maya had protected that boundary for over a decade. She'd protect it forever, if that's what her daughters needed. Chapter 7. The Man Who Built on Lies. Julian Whitmore sat in his corner office watching his empire crumble through plate glass windows that suddenly felt like prison walls. The view hadn't changed. The city sprawled below exactly as it always had, but everything else was collapsing around him with the inevitability of a controlled demolition. The board had requested his resignation. Politely, of course, with carefully worded phrases about protecting the company's interests and allowing fresh leadership during this transition. But resignation meant the same thing regardless of vocabulary. He was being pushed out of the company his grandfather had founded. His phone buzzed with another news alert. Maya Rodriguez's testimony had triggered a federal investigation. The Securities and Exchange Commission was reviewing every transaction from the past 7 years. Investors were demanding explanations. Stock prices had dropped 40% in 6 weeks. Everything he'd built was disintegrating because a woman he'd laughed at 11 years ago had been thorough enough to expose what he'd been stupid enough to ignore. "Julian, the attorneys need to speak with you." His assistant's voice came through the intercom, nervous in a way that hadn't existed before. Everyone treated him differently now, like he was contagious with failure. "Tell them I'll call tomorrow. They said it's urgent." Everything was urgent lately. Julian disconnected the intercom and pulled up the video of the congressional hearing. For the 12th time, he'd watched it obsessively, studying Maya's testimony with the focus he should have applied to his company's financial practices. She'd destroyed him in 40 minutes, calmly, precisely, without a single mistake or hesitation. She'd walked the committee through evidence so damning that his own lawyers had advised immediate settlement discussions with federal prosecutors. But what haunted him wasn't the testimony itself. It was the moment their eyes had met before she began speaking. She'd looked at him with complete indifference, like he was furniture that happened to be in her line of sight. Not anger, not hurt, nothing. He'd become irrelevant to her. Somehow that was worse than if she'd hated him. Julian closed his laptop and reached for the file he'd kept locked in his desk drawer for the past 3 months. A private investigator's report, 200 pages documenting Maya Rodriguez's life since the day she'd walked out of his office pregnant and furious. He'd told himself the investigation was professional curiosity, due diligence before the hearing. But that was a lie he'd stopped believing around page 30. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. He'd become obsessed with understanding what had happened to the woman he'd discarded. The report read like an indictment of his own character. Maya Rodriguez, founder and CEO of Rodriguez and Associates. 15 million in personal assets. 4 offices across 3 states. Reputation as the forensic accountant who never missed a decimal point testimonial record that secured billions in divorce settlements for clients whose husbands tried to hide money. She'd built an empire from nothing while he'd inherited one and nearly destroyed it. But the section about her daughters was what Julian returned to repeatedly. Lucia and Natalia Rodriguez, 11 years old. Honor students at a public school in an affluent neighborhood, mathematics competition winners. Art exhibition participants, described by teachers as exceptionally mature and intensely focused. The investigator had included a photograph from their school's math competition victory. Both girls stood holding a trophy between them, their smiles identical and fierce. They had Julian's eyes, his grandmother's chin, his height and intensity filtered through Maya's determination. They were his daughters, and he'd never met them. The realization hit him at unexpected moments. Standing in line for coffee, sitting in board meetings, lying awake at 3 in the morning while his wife slept in a separate bedroom down the hall. He'd thrown away children who would have been extraordinary. Julian? Colette appeared in his doorway without knocking. Their marriage had devolved into territorial disputes over office space and social calendars. We need to discuss the gala. Cancel it. We can't cancel. The invitations went out months ago. My father's entire donor network will be there. Then you host it. I'm not interested in performing for your father's political ambitions right now. Colette stepped inside and closed the door, her expression hardening into something familiar she'd learned about Maya in year 3 of their marriage. Found the private investigator's initial report Julian had commissioned when guilt first started keeping him awake. She'd stayed anyway. Not out of love, but calculation. Their marriage was a political arrangement, a merger of families and ambitions. Emotion had never been part of the contract. You're thinking about her again, the forensic accountant. Her name is Maya. I don't care what her name is. She's destroying your company and you're acting like she's doing you a favor. Maybe she is. Julian leaned back in his chair. Maybe I deserve to lose everything I was too lazy to actually earn. Self-pity doesn't suit you. Neither does this marriage, but we're both still here. Colette's jaw tightened. I want a divorce. The words should have devastated him, should have felt like another loss in a year full of losses. Instead, Julian felt nothing but mild relief. Finally honest about something. When? After the gala. After my father's campaign announcement. I'll file quietly. We'll separate assets cleanly. You can have your crisis in private instead of dragging me into it. Agreed. She left without another word. 11 years of marriage ending with the same emotional investment as cancelling a gym membership. They'd built nothing real, just a facade that looked good in photographs and fooled absolutely no one who paid attention. Julian returned to the photograph of his daughters. They looked happy, whole, complete without him. He'd convinced himself for years that walking away had been the right choice, that Maya was opportunistic, that the timing was too convenient, that protecting his life with Colette was more important than investigating whether those babies were actually his. All lies he'd told himself because facing the truth required courage he didn't have. Now the truth was public record. Maya had built something remarkable. Their daughters were exceptional, and he'd been exactly what Maya accused him of being, a coward who chose convenience over character. The board meeting to formalize his resignation took place on a Thursday morning. Julian signed the documents without reading them. He'd already lost everything that mattered. The company was just paperwork. Afterward, he sat in his car in the parking garage where Maya's water had broken 11 years ago. The building had repainted since then, new lines on the concrete, different lighting. But the space felt haunted by his own worst decisions. He pulled out his phone and drafted an email to Maya, deleted it. Drafted another. Deleted that too. What could he possibly say? Sorry seemed insufficient. Explanation seemed like excuse-making. Begging for access to his daughters felt insulting after everything. So he said nothing. just sat in his car while rain drummed on the roof and wondered if there was any version of reality where he'd made better choices. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Federal prosecutors had filed charges against 3 Whitmore Capital executives. Julian's name wasn't on the indictment, but everyone knew that was temporary. The investigation was working its way up the chain of command. He'd be arrested within 6 months. His attorneys had already prepared him for that inevitability. Everything was ending. His marriage, his company, his reputation, his freedom, probably. And somewhere across the city, Maya Rodriguez was living a life he'd never be part of, raising daughters who didn't need him, building success that made his failures look even more pathetic. Julian started his engine and drove home to his empty penthouse to begin the process of dismantling a life built on foundations that had never been solid to begin with. Chapter 8. The Meeting He Doesn't Deserve. Maya's administrative assistant looked nervous when she buzzed through to the conference room. "There's a Julian Whitmore in the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment. He's asking to speak with you." Maya's pen stilled on the contract she was reviewing. 8 months had passed since the congressional hearing. She'd assumed Julian had disappeared into whatever hole wealthy men crawled into when their crimes caught up with them. Apparently not. "Tell him I'm unavailable." "I did. He said he'll wait." "Then let him wait. I have meetings all afternoon." But Julian was still in the lobby 90 minutes later. When Maya emerged from her conference room, he sat in one of the leather chairs near the elevator, his suit less expensive than she remembered, his posture showing exhaustion that hadn't existed before. "You're persistent." He stood immediately. "Can we talk? 5 minutes, please." Maya considered refusing, then decided curiosity outweighed inconvenience. She led him to a small meeting room reserved for brief consultations, leaving the door open in case she needed her staff to intervene. "What do you want?" Julian looked worse up close. The polish had worn off, revealing something raw underneath. "I saw the girls at their school from a distance. They're remarkable. You came to my office to tell me you've been watching my daughters without permission." "Not watching, I happened to see them, once, 2 months ago." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Maya remembered from when they'd been together. "I want to meet them. Properly. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway." "No." "Maya, you had your meeting 11 years ago. You laughed. You demanded proof. You offered money to make us disappear. I took your advice. We disappeared. Now they're not yours to want. They're my daughters. Genetically, yes, but fatherhood requires more than biology. It requires showing up. You didn't. We're done here." Maya stood to leave, but Julian moved to block the door. Not threatening, just desperate. "I made a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. But I've had 11 years to understand what I threw away. Please, let me try to fix it." "There's nothing to fix. We're not broken. We're complete exactly as we are. What if I could prove I've changed? What if I spent time demonstrating that I'm not the man I was?" Maya stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold. "You think time matters? You think consistency for a few months earns you access to children you abandoned before they were born? That's not how this works." "Then tell me how it works. Tell me what I need to do." "There's nothing you can do. That's the point. Some choices can't be unmade. You picked your life. Now live with it." She moved past him toward the door, but Julian's next words stopped her. "I lost everything. My company, my marriage, my reputation. Everything I built or inherited is gone. And the only thing I actually care about is that I can't meet my own children. Tell me that's not punishment enough." Maya turned back. "You think losing money and status makes you sympathetic? You think suffering consequences for your own actions somehow earns you redemption? That's rich man's logic. Poor people face consequences their whole lives and never get second chances. I'm not asking for a second chance, I'm asking for a first one. I never met them. I never held them. I never got to be their father because I was too stupid and scared to try." "And whose fault is that?" Mine, completely mine, but they deserve the chance to know me, even if I don't deserve them. Maya wanted to throw him out, wanted to call security and have him escorted from the building the way he'd done to her 11 years ago, but something in his brokenness gave her pause. Not sympathy, just recognition that rage eventually calcified into something harder to carry. "I'll think about it." Julian's expression shifted to cautious hope. "Really?" "I said I'll think about it. That's not a promise. That's not permission. That's me acknowledging that my daughters might have questions someday that I can't answer. If I decide letting them meet you serves their interests, I'll contact you. Until then, stay away from them. Stay away from their school. Stay away from me." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You might not like my decision." Over the next 6 weeks, strange things started happening. A donation appeared in the scholarship fund at the girls' school. Anonymous, but the amount was specific enough that Maya recognized Julian's pattern. She matched it publicly, noting that anonymous generosity often came from people trying to buy their way past their own failures. Flowers arrived at her office with no card. Maya had them donated to a hospice center. Julian showed up at a public event where Maya was speaking, sitting in the back row and leaving before she could have him removed. Then at another event, and another. He wasn't approaching, wasn't demanding anything, just existing in her periphery like a ghost haunting the edges of the life he'd rejected. The stalker guy was outside school again, Natalia mentioned casually one afternoon. He sat in his car across the street during pickup, didn't get out or anything, just watched. Maya's blood went cold. When? Yesterday, and like 3 times last week. It's weird, but not scary weird, more like sad weird. Why didn't you tell me immediately? Because you would have freaked out, which you're doing now. Lucia nodded agreement. He's not dangerous. We looked him up. He's our father. We figured you knew he was around. Maya wanted to call the police immediately, wanted to file a restraining order and make Julian understand that watching her children from a car was unacceptable, regardless of genetic connection. Instead, she asked the question that terrified her most. "Do you want to meet him?" Both girls considered this seriously. Then Lucia shrugged. "Not really. If he wanted to meet us, he could have tried 11 years ago. Sitting in a car outside our school isn't trying. It's creepy." "Agreed," Natalia added. "He can stay away. We're good without him." Their matter-of-fact rejection should have satisfied Maya. Instead, it raised new concerns. Her daughters were developing into people who expected nothing from anyone, who built walls instead of bridges, who mistrusted connection at the first sign of complication. She'd raised them to be that way, deliberately. Now she wondered if she'd gone too far. Maya filed the restraining order the next morning. The judge granted it immediately after reviewing Julian's pattern of appearing at the school. The order prohibited him from coming within 500 feet of Lucia, Natalia, or their school property. She thought that would end it. Instead, Julian found other ways to exist in their periphery. He volunteered at the food bank, where Maya donated time monthly. He attended public city council meetings, where Maya sometimes testified about financial transparency. He stayed precisely 501 feet away from everywhere her daughters went, never breaking the order, but never truly disappearing. "He's committed, I'll give him that," Rachel observed during one of their rare lunches. "Most guys give up after the first restraining order. Most guys have self-respect. Or maybe he's actually changed. Maybe losing everything taught him something." Maya set down her fork. "Whose side are you on?" "Yours. Always yours. But maybe consider that people can learn from their mistakes, even terrible mistakes." He didn't make a mistake. He made a choice. True. And now he's choosing to show up consistently despite getting nothing in return. That's different than the guy who laughed at you 11 years ago. Maya wanted to argue, but Rachel's logic was sound. Julian had been present in some form for 8 months now. No demands, no ultimatums, just consistent visibility while respecting legal boundaries. It didn't earn him forgiveness, but it did suggest he'd learned that actions mattered more than words. That night, Maya lay awake, considering Rachel's words. Her daughters were 12 now, old enough to form opinions, old enough to decide who deserved space in their lives. She'd spent over a decade making sure Julian stayed on the outside. Maybe it was time to let Lucia and Natalia decide where the boundaries should be. The thought terrified her. But raising strong daughters meant teaching them to make hard choices, not making those choices for them forever. Chapter 9. The Long Road. Nobody Walks for You. The restraining order expired on a Tuesday in March, exactly 1 year after it had been issued. Maya received the notification in the mail, reviewed it carefully, and filed it away without comment. If Julian reappeared, she'd deal with it then. He reappeared that afternoon. "Mama, the man with our eyes is sitting outside the library." Natalia's voice held more curiosity than concern. "He's reading, just sitting on a bench reading. Should we be worried?" Maya walked to the window and looked down at the street below. Julian sat on a public bench with a book, his posture relaxed, making no move to approach the building. He stayed there for an hour, then left when the library closed. The next week, he was there again. Same bench, different book, never approaching, never even looking up at the building. "He's consistent, I'll give him that," Lucia observed. "Most people would have given up by now." "Most people have lives that don't revolve around watching children they don't know," Maya replied, her tone sharper than intended, but the pattern continued. Julian appeared at places the girls frequented, always maintaining careful distance, never violating any legal boundaries. He sat in the coffee shop where Natalia studied with friends. He attended Lucia's public school orchestra concert, sitting in the back row and leaving before the lights came up. He existed in their periphery like a piece of furniture that kept showing up in different rooms. 8 months passed, then 14, then 20. "He's been doing this for almost 2 years now," Lucia mentioned one evening while helping Maya prepare dinner. "That's longer than most marriages last." "That's a cynical observation for a 13-year-old. "I'm a realistic observation. He's been more consistent in staying away than most fathers are in staying present." Maya paused, chopping vegetables. "Are you defending him?" "No, I'm just noting patterns. He wants something and he's willing to wait for it without guarantee of getting it. That's unusual behavior. It's obsessive behavior. Maybe it's the only way he knows to prove he's changed. Words don't mean anything. Actions over time do. Isn't that what you always taught us?" Maya had no good response to her own logic being used against her. The breaking point came on a cold afternoon in November. Julian's mother died. Maya saw the obituary in the paper, a small notice about a woman she'd never met, whose genetics lived in her daughters' faces. Lucia found it first. "She looks like us, like if we aged 70 years. "She does." Maya studied the photograph. The resemblance was undeniable. "Should we send something, like a card or flowers?" "Why would you do that?" "Because losing a parent hurts. Even if he doesn't deserve our sympathy, maybe his mother does. She never did anything to us." Maya wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the boundary that had protected them for 13 years. But Lucia's logic was sound. The dead woman had been their grandmother, whether any of them acknowledged it or not. "If you want to send a card, you can. No names, no return address, just acknowledgement." Both girls worked on the card that evening, choosing their words carefully. Maya didn't ask to see it before they mailed it. This was their decision, their gesture, their choice about how to navigate complicated family dynamics. 3 days later, Maya received a voicemail on her work phone, Julian's voice, raw with grief and something that might have been hope. "Thank you. I don't know if it was you or the girls or someone else entirely, but someone sent a card to my mother's memorial. It just said, "Sorry for your loss," with no signature. "I'm going to believe it was them, because that's what I need to believe right now. So thank you for letting them have that kindness, even though I don't deserve their kindness. Thank you." Maya deleted the voicemail and said nothing to her daughters about it. But that night, lying in bed unable to sleep, she wondered if she'd been holding on to rage longer than it served any purpose. Julian had lost his mother, his company, his marriage, his reputation. Everything he'd built or inherited was gone. He'd spent 2 years proving he could show up consistently without demanding anything in return that didn't earn him forgiveness. But maybe it earned him conversation. "What if we met him?" Lucia asked over breakfast a week later. "Not as father-daughter's reunion thing, just as people who share genetics and want to understand each other. Would that be terrible?" Maya's coffee cup stilled halfway to her mouth. "You want to meet him?" "Want is strong. We're curious. That's different." Natalia nodded agreement. "We've watched him for 2 years. He's persistent, he respects boundaries, he doesn't push or demand. That's more maturity than a lot of adults show. Maybe he's earned one conversation. One conversation doesn't fix 13 years of absence. One ordered coffee he didn't drink, Maya ordered tea she didn't want. The girls ordered nothing and launched into interrogation with the efficiency of prosecutors. "Why did you laugh when Mama told you she was pregnant?" Julian flinched. "I don't have a good answer. I was scared. I was planning a different life. Your existence complicated that plan. So I chose to believe it wasn't real rather than face what it meant. That's cowardice, not reasoning." "You're right. It was complete cowardice." "Do you regret it?" "Every single day for 13 years. That's a long time to regret something without trying to fix it. I tried. Your mother got a restraining order, which I deserved, so I tried different approach. I showed up, consistently, without demanding anything, because I figured if I was patient enough, eventually you'd decide whether I was worth knowing." Natalia leaned forward. "Why should we believe you've changed? You spent 2 years sitting on benches and watching from distances. That's stalker behavior, not father behavior." "You're right again. But I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't force you to know me. I could only prove I was willing to wait however long it took for you to choose, even if that choice was never." The girls asked him about his company, his marriage, his mother, his life before and after they existed. Julian answered everything honestly, not trying to soften his failures or excuse his choices. He owned his mistakes with a humility that Maya had never seen in him before. After an hour, Lucia and Natalia exchanged one of their silent twin conversations. Then Lucia spoke carefully. "We don't trust you. We might never trust you. But we're willing to have coffee again. Once a month, public place, same rules. And see if your consistency holds past getting what you want." Julian's eyes filled, but he blinked the tears back. "That's more than I deserve, thank you." "Don't thank us. We're not doing this for you. We're doing it because we want to know if people can actually change, or if it's all performance. You're our case study." Natalia added, "And if you ever make Mama cry or hurt us or prove that this was all manipulation, we'll disappear so completely you'll never find us again. Clear." Crystal clear. They left the coffee shop with an agreement to meet again in a month. Maya drove home in silence while her daughters processed what they'd learned. "He's broken," Lucia finally said, "like genuinely broken. I don't know if he can be fixed." "Do you want to fix him?" Maya asked. "No, that's not our job, but I want to see if broken people can still become something worthwhile, for ourselves. So we know it's possible." Maya understood then that this wasn't about Julian at all. It was about her daughters learning that people could survive being shattered and still build something meaningful from the pieces. They were watching their father's reconstruction not for his sake, but to learn how to navigate their own future damage. And that was a lesson Maya couldn't teach them alone. Chapter 10. The Inheritance That Mattered. The coffee shop meetings continued monthly for 18 months. Julian showed up early every time. He answered every question honestly. He never asked for more than what Lucia and Natalia offered. He existed in the small space they created for him without trying to expand its boundaries. Slowly, cautiously, something resembling trust began to form. Not the trust that comes from years of consistent presence, but the trust that comes from watching someone respect your boundaries even when it costs them everything they want. He remembered, "I had a gallery show next week," Natalia mentioned one afternoon. Didn't ask to come, just acknowledged it and said he hoped it went well. That's growth, right? Or manipulation designed to look like growth, Maya replied, still unable to fully release her protective instincts. You've been saying that for 18 months. At what point do his actions speak louder than your suspicions? Maya had no good answer for that. Lucia graduated 8th grade with honors and a scholarship offer to a prestigious private high school. Julian sent a card with no return address. Inside was a single sentence. Your intelligence was never in question. Proud of you. No signature. No assumption of relationship, just acknowledgement. That's actually kind of perfect, Lucia admitted, showing Maya the card. He's not claiming credit. He's just noting that he sees me. That's all I wanted. The 8th grade graduation ceremony took place in the school auditorium on a humid evening in late spring. Maya sat in the front row, watching her daughters walk across the stage to receive certificates that represented 13 years of work and worry and relentless determination. They'd made it. All three of them had survived and thrived despite everything working against them. Julian sat in the back row. Maya saw him arrive and chose not to react. He'd earned the right to witness this moment from a distance. He hadn't earned the right to be part of it, but he'd at least earned permission to observe after the ceremony. Families gathered in the courtyard for photographs and celebration. Maya's employees had come to show support. Rachel brought flowers. The girls' favorite teachers stopped to offer congratulations. Julian stayed on the periphery, near enough to see but far enough to respect boundaries. Then Lucia did something unexpected. She walked over to him, Natalia following close behind. Maya watched from across the courtyard, her heart hammering, ready to intervene if needed. You came. Lucia's statement needed no elaboration. I hoped it would be okay. I can leave if it's not. It's fine. We just wanted to say that we're willing to have coffee more than once a month. Maybe twice, if you're still interested. Julian's expression shifted through disbelief to careful hope. I'm interested. Very interested. We're not calling you Dad, Natalia clarified immediately. That title has to be earned over years, not months. Right now, you're Julian, a person we're getting to know who happens to share our genetics. That's fair, more than fair. And Mama has final say on everything. If she thinks you're overstepping or being inappropriate, you're gone forever, clear? Absolutely clear. The girls nodded and returned to Maya's side. They didn't announce what had happened, didn't make it a moment that required processing or discussion. They'd made a decision and communicated it. Now they moved forward. That was how they handled everything. With surgical precision and no unnecessary emotion, Maya had raised them that way. Now she wondered if she'd made them too efficient at cutting people out when complications arose. 2 months into their increased meeting schedule, Julian invited all three of them to dinner at his apartment's small gathering. No pressure, just an opportunity to see where he lived now. He's in a 1-bedroom in a building that requires key fob access, Natalia reported after researching online. It's like 20% of what his old penthouse cost. He downgraded his entire life. Or he lost everything and has no choice, Maya countered. Either way, the offer is safe. We checked. Public building, multiple exits, security cameras. We can leave any time. They accepted the invitation. Julian's apartment was small but carefully maintained. Books everywhere. A kitchen that looked actually used. Photographs on the refrigerator, recent ones of the girls at their various events, Always candid shots from public spaces where he'd been watching from afar. You kept pictures of us, Lucia observed. I did. I know that's probably creepy, but I wanted to remember what I was working toward. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Julian cooked pasta and made salad. They talked about school and summer plans and upcoming high school decisions. He asked questions that showed he'd been paying attention during their coffee meetings. He remembered details they'd mentioned months ago. You're good at this, Natalia said eventually. Better than I expected. Good at what? Being present without being overwhelming. A lot of people trying to make up for lost time would have shown up with huge gestures and emotional speeches. You just made pasta and asked about our day. I figured you'd had enough grand gestures from men who thought money solved everything. Sometimes pasta is better. Maya watched this interaction from her seat, simultaneously proud of her daughters and terrified of what came next, because softening toward Julian meant opening themselves to potential hurt. And she'd spent 13 years teaching them that preventing hurt was more important than risking connection. Now they were choosing the risk anyway. The conversation eventually turned to Julian's legal troubles. Federal prosecutors had offered a plea deal, probation instead of prison, restitution payments that would consume his finances for years. He'd accepted immediately. Why not fight it? Lucia asked. Plenty of wealthy men fight charges forever. Because I was guilty, not of everything they initially accused me of, but of enough fighting would mean claiming innocence I don't have. This way, I acknowledge what I did and accept consequences. That seemed like better approach. That's very different from the man who laughed at Mama 13 years ago. I'm trying to be very different from that man. Someday I might actually succeed. When they left that evening, Lucia and Natalia seemed thoughtful in a way that made Maya nervous. They were considering forgiving him, maybe not fully, maybe not yet, but they were opening the door to possibility. He's not terrible, Natalia said in the car. He's actually kind of okay, in a damaged but trying way. He hurt me, Maya reminded them. He threw us away. He hurt you 13 years ago. Since then he's lost everything and rebuilt himself into someone better that counts for something. Does it? You taught us to judge people by consistent actions over time. He's been consistent for 3 years now, never demanding, never pushing, always showing up when invited and leaving when asked. That's better track record than most people we know. Maya wanted to argue, wanted to remind them of every moment she'd struggled alone, every night she'd worked until exhaustion while pregnant and terrified, every birthday party where they'd been the only children without a father present. But her daughters weren't children anymore. They were becoming women who could make their own assessments and draw their own conclusions. And they'd concluded that Julian Whitmore had earned permission to exist in the margins of their lives, not as the father he should have been, but as the person he was trying to become. 6 months later, they invited him to their high school orientation, not as family, just as someone they knew who might find it interesting. He came and sat with Maya's employees in the parent section, making no claim to relationship, but accepting the invitation with gratitude. The twins started high school the same way they'd started everything, together, focused, relentlessly competent. They joined academic clubs and art programs and debate teams. They built lives rich with achievement and friendship, and careful boundaries around what they would and wouldn't share. Julian remained at the edges, present but not intrusive, available but not demanding. He showed up to their events when invited and respected their space when they needed distance. He sent cards on appropriate occasions with messages that acknowledged them without claiming them. He was learning to exist in their orbit without expecting to be their center of gravity, and slowly, over months that became years, the girls began to soften. Not into forgiveness exactly, but into acceptance that people could change if they wanted it badly enough and worked at it consistently enough. Maya watched this transformation with mixed feelings. Pride that her daughters could extend grace she'd never managed. Fear that they were opening themselves to disappointment. Relief that they were learning something she'd never been able to teach. That walls could be lowered without collapsing completely. On their 15th birthday, the girls asked Maya a question she'd been dreading. Would it be okay if Julian came to our party, not as a dad, just as someone we want there? Maya's first instinct was to refuse, to protect them from potential hurt, to maintain the boundaries she'd built so carefully. Instead, she said yes, because they'd earned the right to make this choice. Because they were old enough to handle disappointment if it came, because sometimes protecting meant letting them risk. Julian came to the party. He brought books as gifts, carefully chosen based on things they'd mentioned wanting. He stayed for an hour, talked with Maya's employees and Rachel's family, and left when it seemed appropriate. He didn't overstay, didn't make the day about him, just existed in their celebration without demanding center stage. That was nice, Lucia said after he'd gone. Having him there felt right. Maya wanted to disagree, wanted to say it felt like betrayal of everything she'd endured alone. But looking at her daughters' faces, happy, whole, complete in ways she'd never managed, she realized they weren't betraying anything, they were healing what she couldn't heal for them. The twins didn't need Julian's name to be extraordinary. They didn't need his money to build their worth. They didn't need his validation to know their value. But maybe, if he spent enough years proving he'd learned what those things actually cost, they'd let him witness what he'd almost destroyed. Not because he deserved it, because they chose it. And choice, they'd learned from their mother, was the only inheritance that actually mattered.